It is critically important to have a dedicated team of individuals who can actively contribute to systematizing and further developing the organization.
Today, the Board of Directors acts as a concentrator of methodologies and knowledge related to strategy.
Historically, we have lived in a state of constant change. This is part of our DNA. That is why adaptability is one of the key requirements. The situation in Ukraine, in my view, with women in leadership is improving out of necessity. This is exactly the moment for Ukrainian women to invite themselves into key leadership positions.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Boards of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin channel. Today, our guest is Katerina Kovalenko. Katerina, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sergey. Thank you for having me.
Katerina is the chair of the advisory board at Ukraine Matters, vice president at Nova Ukraine, and a board member of several European companies. Katerina's experience includes more than 20 years in senior leadership roles at major international companies such as Microsoft and AXA, as well as serving as head of strategy at the gas transmission system operator of Ukraine. Katerina, you possess a truly unique blend of expertise spanning innovation, strategic communications, marketing, and human resources. Your multifaceted background is quite remarkable. If we look at the areas of expertise that are currently most in demand on boards of directors, supervisory boards and advisory boards alike, these are precisely the areas you bring. How did you manage to bring all of this expertise together?
First of all, Sergey, I would like to thank you for unpacking such an extremely important topic. For Ukraine, this topic is corporate governance and the work of boards of directors. Ukraine certainly has a great deal to teach the world, especially when it comes to creativity, adaptability, and innovation. At the same time, there are areas where we need to become more professional and more systematic. So thank you in particular for focusing on this topic. We will explore it together. How does one bring all of this experience together? It came together very organically. I can't say that I had a deliberate goal to accumulate all of this experience, but as I look back, the main criteria or the main background for all of this was definitely my work at Microsoft. Especially in the Ukrainian market and across Central and Eastern Europe, when the IT market was growing extremely fast and it was necessary to understand and study not only how technology works, but how business works and how technology can support business objectives. In that sense, growing first in marketing and strategic communications, the next very logical step was to move into a commercial organization on the client side, one that looks at technology not only as a set of tools, but in terms of how to improve operations, increase efficiency, enhance internal processes, and strengthen external communication with customers. This experience felt very natural, transitioning from a technology company focused on implementing communication products and engaging with clients to project management on the business side, first in digital transformation and then in broader business transformation. Because digital is a part of the business. It is simply a tool. And of course, working with large teams, my certification and education, specifically in HR, played a significant role, giving me greater confidence in how to work with people, how to motivate them, and how to help them achieve their goals. Because the key success factor in any organizational transformation is people. You can implement any system. Changing people's behavior is very complex and challenging. This experience felt incredibly organic. Today, my colleagues and I often say that all of the experience we had before the war was, in fact, a very systematic and substantial preparation for where we are now and for the initiatives, programs, and the impact that each of us is creating for Ukraine today.
Katerina, based on your broad business experience and expertise, particularly in these most crucial areas today, focusing on strategy development, board governance, and effective human resource management, innovation and marketing, how useful do you believe boards can be for Ukrainian businesses, startups, or perhaps for non-profit organizations, which are now quite numerous in Ukraine?
That's a great question. I will probably speak more from the perspective of non-profit organizations and mission-driven organizations, as this is the space I have been working in for the past 4 years and where I have the most hands-on experience. In this context, boards are critically important. It is critically important to have a board and a team of people who can help systematize and develop the organization. First and foremost, boards of directors. A board is a team of highly experienced individuals with strong expertise across different domains. governance. The main benefit that boards can bring to an organization, whether it is a business, a startup, or a nonprofit, is, of course, long-term planning. And when I say long-term planning, I do not mean planning for 1 year. In today's reality, especially during the war and under the level of uncertainty we are all living in, planning 5 to 10 years ahead may sound almost unrealistic. However, what has been very encouraging over the past year is meeting various delegations from Ukraine here in the United States, particularly representatives of nonprofit organizations. More and more of them, especially younger leaders, are starting to speak about the importance of having a clear vision and a clear strategic understanding of where their organization could be in 10 years and where it wants to be. Therefore, having not only a team that is deeply involved in operational processes, but a team that instead understands the broader picture of what is happening not only in the country but globally, understands the organization's place within these changes and within the environment in which it operates. This is a critical benefit and a major competitive advantage. This is strategic planning. I would also highlight another very important aspect. It is the constant alignment of the organization with its mission and vision. Very often, when an organization has a strong mission, it can lose sight while operating in day-to-day mode of changes happening around it. A board of directors that is not deeply embedded in operational processes, but instead views the organization holistically, becomes a powerful mechanism to ask the right questions, to reframe priorities, and in some cases, even to consider adjusting the strategic direction, or alternatively, to confirm that the organization is moving forward with confidence. This also relates directly to ethics and legal accountability, especially in Ukraine today, where Ukrainian organizations, startups, businesses, and nonprofits alike can only succeed by operating beyond Ukraine's borders. Partnerships are essential. Trust can only be built by organizations that demonstrate a high standard of ethics and strong legal accountability, not only in the Ukrainian market, but across all markets where the organization or its partners operate. This is about compliance. It is, of course, also about self-reflection, asking whether resources are being used appropriately, responsibly, and wisely. Assets, people, finances, partners, communities, and the networks the organization has built. And this is where boards and the people who chair, mentor, or advise organizations can truly see the bigger picture, provide guidance, and offer meaningful support. I would probably conclude by saying that when you have a board of directors, it is critically important to compose that board with people from different professional backgrounds and with diverse sets of competencies. Finance, legal, innovation, marketing, HR. This diversity enables a more balanced and, importantly, less risky approach to decision-making. It helps ensure that decisions the organization takes and the responsibilities it assumes are aligned with its internal processes and governance procedures.
And it is genuinely fascinating to observe how companies approach strategy today. In many ways, boards of directors have become a kind of hub, a concentrator of methodologies and strategic knowledge, because the board of directors, the members of the board of directors, they work in various companies. Each company faces its own challenges, in addition to our shared overarching challenge, the full-scale war and its consequences. And those consequences will be with us for quite some time. Naturally, companies are diligently working to factor all these aspects into their strategic planning. And boards of directors are indeed. They are extremely valuable for businesses because, thanks to the continuously expanding experience of their board members, they become exceptional experts in strategy development and, crucially, in the successful implementation of that strategy. Especially at a time when very few people have real expertise in strategic planning during a full-scale war. This is not a textbook or a theoretical framework. This is a world that can change within a single minute. There is very limited experience of this kind of strategic environment in the market, but it does exist among board members. This makes the current moment a truly unique phenomenon. Katerina, in your view, as the situation in Ukraine continues to evolve during the full-scale war, are there any specific expectations or demands from owners or stakeholders regarding the formation of boards and the qualifications of board members?
I am not sure that these demands are entirely new. They have probably always existed, but today they have become much more acute and visible. Because in conditions of uncertainty, what the world often used to call VUCA, this is no longer a VUCA environment. This is the new normal. This is the new normal we are all living in. And it is very interesting when speaking with students at Georgetown University within the nonprofit executive program for nonprofit leaders. These are leaders of American organizations, people serving on boards of directors or in senior executive roles. They they have a strong demand to learn how to adapt to these changes. In Ukraine, I believe this demand emerged many years ago because historically we have lived in constant change. This is part of our DNA. That's why adaptability is one of the key requirements. And to be adaptive, all the cards need to be on the table, or at least the organization must have core competencies and functional areas covered by people who truly understand them. What I am increasingly seeing from my perspective is that boards are inviting people with different types of expertise, different backgrounds, and from different industries. This diversity provides an opportunity in decision-making processes to truly consider all the various opinions, different aspects, and so on. As a result, this becomes one of the elements that helps organizations remain adaptive. Speed of decision-making is also directly linked to whether we have the necessary information here and now, or whether we need to invest additional time and resources into understanding legacy processes, procedures, or finding the right people. Having board members with diverse experience once again supports faster adaptation and quicker decision making. And all of this ultimately comes down to effectiveness. More broadly, what I'm hearing more and more is a growing demand around institutional capacity, both for organizational development and for the organization's own institutional resilience. Interestingly, just this week, we concluded the 7th Ukraine Action Summit organized by the American Coalition for Ukraine and Nova Ukraine, where I am one of the founders. It is a 5-day summit, 2 days of conference sessions, and 3 days dedicated to advocacy on Capitol Hill for Ukraine. Over the 2 conference days alone, we welcomed 700 participants from across the United States, representing all 50 states. The purpose of this conference was to explain to American audiences and to provide broader context around what is happening in Ukraine. The ultimate goal was to strengthen partnerships between the United States and Ukraine in business, in the development of civil society, and in the growth of both non-profit and for-profit organizations. There was a dedicated panel discussion focused specifically on the development of civil society. The speakers included representatives from Ukraine, among them Volodymyr from Izar Ednania, who has been working on the development of non-profit organizations in Ukraine for more than 30 years. We were also joined by Zhenya Mazurenko, founder of Philanthropy Ukraine, as well as American leaders of non-profit organizations, including representatives from Georgetown University. What was particularly interesting is how often the importance of building institutional capacity came up in the discussion. Organizations are not sustainable or resilient unless they have a strong foundation in place. So what does that foundation actually mean for an organization? It means a leadership team that clearly understands where the organization is heading. It means a clear long-term strategy and vision. It means a team of people and experts who are capable of executing that mission, strategy, and the necessary processes. When this solid foundation is in place, it becomes considerably simpler for organizations to effectively navigate the complexities of our modern world. This allows them to skillfully adapt and respond to the various changes and pressing challenges that the organization inevitably encounters.
And obviously, over time, once the war ends, boards will continue to be important and valuable, including in terms of access to financing, ensuring transparency, and providing additional confidence for potential investors or creditors.
Absolutely, I agree. This is one of the critical elements. I often hear colleagues in Ukraine say that boards are still perceived largely as a matter of status. People are invited because board membership is seen as prestigious. However, as a board member at Ukraine Matters and as chair of the Supervisory Board at Nova Ukraine in Ukraine, I can say that this is a substantial amount of work. Compliance and legal requirements are just one part of the job. It also involves networking, staying informed about trends in the organization's field, discussing and strategizing potential new scenarios that might emerge in the market, and asking ourselves where we as an organization could position ourselves given scenario A or scenario B. So this is about transparency. It is certainly about alignment with international standards, especially for organizations working with international partners or donors. And it is also about mentorship for the entire team within the organization. I would even highlight an exceptionally important role for HR competence within boards of directors across 2 key dimensions. The first dimension is that a board of directors is itself a group of people that needs to be formed, organized, motivated, engaged, retained, and whose performance must be assessed. All of this requires HR expertise within the board, because the board is also a unit with a defined function, specific responsibilities, and a real-time commitment needed to make it work effectively. The second HR-related role is that any strategy, no matter how strong, will remain only a strategy if the organization is not ready to implement it. This is where having HR competence within the board becomes critical. It helps to truly understand the organization's current state, how it looks today in terms of its organizational structure, the people within it, its motivational systems, and the opportunities for individual growth and realization inside the organization, and to assess whether this overall system and structure are aligned with and capable of supporting the ambitious goals the organization or company is striving to achieve. This is why the role of strategic HR on boards of directors is exceptionally important, especially now. Given the situation in Ukraine, people are under constant pressure, workloads are extremely high, and mental health has become one of the key areas that requires focused attention. If we are truly talking about long-term impact, we must consider both the way work is organized and the way people interact, how we support and care for our people, while also being clear about real KPIs and ensuring people have the tools and opportunities to meet them. In this sense, HR serves as a crucial indicator, a kind of litmus test, offering valuable insights to the board of directors, advisory councils, or executive teams. It guides them on what needs to be reinforced within the organization to successfully achieve its set objectives.
Yes, and I would also add that HR plays a critical role in succession planning. This includes succession at the level of board directors and board committee members, as well as succession at the top management level. Because a missile strike or any other disruption can happen at any moment, and we are all operating in a high-risk environment. On the other hand, business continuity planning was objectively underestimated in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion. After the invasion, it became clear to everyone that BCP is a must-have for Ukrainian businesses. Having a business continuity plan is no longer optional. And of course, HR plays a very significant role in business continuity planning as well.
Absolutely, I completely agree. This is especially important now, during the war and after victory, because I'm convinced that once active hostilities end, Ukraine will face an enormous amount of work. This will span the business sector, the IT sector in particular, the public sector, and the non-profit sector. That is why it is so important to develop HR competence in every manager. Anyone who is a people manager is, to some extent, an HR professional. And this is not just about asking, like, how are you doing?
It requires a certain level of strategic thinking from HR as well. So this is not about traditional HR with a limited set of well-known operational functions, but rather about HR at a strategic level. HR that can act as a true strategic partner to the board or to the company's executive leadership.
That is true, and I am very glad to see this because I know many colleagues who are actively developing and strengthening strategic HR within their organizations. For example, Katerina Kovalevska, who focuses on developing HR professionals and supporting them in obtaining international certification. The Horizon Capital Foundation with Olha Kovalchuk also supports portfolio companies by helping them build and develop the people function in a truly strategic way. And Women Leaders for Ukraine, which brings together many strong HR experts who actively contribute and provide real support, working through people to raise effectiveness and professionalism within organizations and ultimately to drive organizational growth.
We have already touched briefly on the issue of the full-scale war and its consequences, including HR-related challenges resulting from the war. This will likely require a much more serious and deliberate approach to women's leadership. This is critically important because we understand that, unfortunately, even after the war ends, many men who are currently serving will not be able to return home immediately, not to mention the fact that male casualties have been significant. As a result, women must be prepared to step into leadership roles at the top management level, as well as to join boards of directors and supervisory boards.
I fully agree. The situation with women leaders in Ukraine, in my view, is improving, but largely out of necessity. Not because more positions have suddenly become available to women, but because women are being forced by circumstances to take on leadership roles. I am very encouraged that this year, for the first time, Women Leaders for Ukraine is launching a major community-driven initiative along with a comprehensive market analysis to recognize companies that are systematically implementing gender equality principles at the executive and board levels. I strongly believe this initiative will be successful and that it will go beyond quotas, focusing instead on a real understanding of what truly helps women step into and succeed in leadership positions. This is a very interesting topic because it's not only relevant for Ukraine. Milan Verveer, Ambassador at Large and President of the Georgetown University Institute for Women, Peace and Security, consistently emphasizes one core message. Especially during times of war and uncertainty, women must be present at the negotiating table. There is a phrase I particularly love which has become a personal motto for me. It comes from Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. She started this book with a powerful message to all women. Do not wait to be invited to the table. Invite yourself. And I truly believe that now is exactly the time for Ukrainian women to invite themselves into key leadership positions, because the knowledge, experience, and understanding of what needs to be done are already there. And the leadership style that is often more characteristic of women is especially valuable in the current context. There is so much aggression, force, and directive leadership in the world right now that, in my view, having women on boards can help create balance and open up different paths, perhaps not always more efficient, but often simpler and more natural ways of addressing the challenges we face. Since you've already touched on the topic of women, I would really like to share something. I know many women who formerly occupy second-in-command roles in organizations, yet in reality are responsible for overall effectiveness and performance. I spent a long time reflecting on why this happens, given their experience, education, and expertise. And I believe I have found the answer for myself. I would be very glad if, together with women leaders for Ukraine, we could dive deeper into this topic and perhaps generate more insights that would help create conditions in which women can hold leadership positions in government, in business, and in non-profit organizations. I believe there are several dimensions to this issue. Historically, it's been very difficult to form partnerships in Ukraine. There have been several attempts to build coalitions. There is even a well-known saying, for every 2 Cossacks, there are 3 hetmans. So the first issue is partnership between women and men. I am not a strong supporter of quotas when it comes to gender equality. I am much more in favor of learning how to work in partnership, men and women together. Naturally, we have different leadership styles, and our ways of thinking and decision-making differ. I believe in partnership because it allows us not to compete, but to strengthen one another. The second issue is that women very often lack confidence. This is a deep and complex topic, but for some reason in Ukraine, women are often ready to take on responsibility for execution, yet not always ready to step into key leadership roles and assume full leadership accountability. Last year, we tried to identify women who are chairs of boards or heads of organizations. This turned out to be quite challenging, even though such women do exist in Ukraine. Their visibility remains relatively low, and this is not a question for society at large, nor is it a question for men. It is a question for women themselves. And the third area where we can and should work to create change in Ukraine is the broader set of conditions for women within society. Let us not forget that women are often mothers and wives, and very frequently they are responsible not only for caring for their own parents, but also for their husband's parents. And when the question of career development arises, society and the conditions within society do not always allow women to shift their focus and succeed in the way they could in their professional lives. I remember myself when I first joined Microsoft. Of course, working at Microsoft is very dynamic. It is not a typical 9 to 6 job. Sometimes we stayed very late because of product launches and because we worked across different time zones. I was fortunate because my mother decided to take maternity leave instead of me and helped raise my daughter, who had just been born at that time. But many women do not have such an opportunity. Kindergartens work only until 6 in the evening. What happens after 6 p.m.? Parents come to pick up their children because they cannot leave a child alone in an empty kindergarten, and so on. This is why social services in Ukraine are not well developed. For example, unlike in the United States, where specialized organizations can take care of elderly parents. As a result, women do not have to spend every morning and evening going to pharmacies, arranging treatments, and providing everyday support to older family members. That is why I believe we will see more women in leadership positions when they have this kind of support system in place. When everyday responsibilities are covered through family support, social services, and accessible childcare and schools, women can feel confident leaving their children in a safe environment and continue investing their time in societal development and in driving change in business and in society.
Katerina, in order to build this support system and remove existing barriers, there needs to be clear demand. And this demand has to be formed through certain mechanisms. Perhaps quotas or other tools are indeed needed to effectively push this process forward. A process that leads to greater attention to gender equality at the board level. Because at the top management level, according to recent statistics, the situation is actually quite different. Around 40% of top management positions are currently held by women. However, when it comes to boards, the unfortunate figures we usually hear range from 18% to 24-25%. At the same time, I recently heard data from the Ukrainian National Securities and Stock Market Commission, which conducted a dedicated study showing that nearly 50% of board members are women in companies where boards were established under the new legislation. These are primarily joint stock companies and financial institutions. In those cases, we are close to having a proper balance. However, we all know that in a large number of private companies and state-owned enterprises, this balance still does not exist. And the overall publicly available statistics outside the Securities Commission currently remain in the range of 18.3% to 24%.
As we already mentioned, there is not a strong sector-wide quota framework, but when quotas are introduced, the way roles are assigned becomes very visible, especially in the United States, where in some cases selection is not always based purely on professional merit. But rather, it's about fulfilling these needs, meeting these demands, and satisfying the quota requirements. And Sergiy, you made a very good point about the need to create demand. I believe women themselves can start shaping this demand by communicating their expertise, highlighting their strengths, and demonstrating their capabilities in practice. In this sense, quotas may be needed primarily to monitor what is happening in the market. They can also provide deeper insight by helping us identify imbalances and ask the right questions about why they exist. For me, quotas are more about gaining a deeper understanding of the market and building baseline insights that we can further analyze and learn from. Not about forcing companies to appoint women to boards, but about creating conditions in which this happens organically and naturally from both sides.
Katerina, you have a very interesting and dynamic management career. At the same time, you are actively involved in boards of directors and supervisory boards. How were you able to overcome these barriers? And these so-called glass ceilings or glass cliffs?
My friends often say that I have a very high level of resilience. So the first no, the second no, and the third no do not mean no for me. And secondly, at some point I probably started inviting myself to the table, to the decision-making table. Very often in my career, I heard the phrase, "It's good to hear, but you were not asked." And so even with that in mind, if I have something meaningful to say, if I have valuable insights to contribute, and if I truly believe it's important to voice it, then I will do so, even when I haven't been directly asked to speak. Some organizations invite me because of my experience and background, but I am convinced that without this kind of visibility and self-advocacy, many women remain in the shadows. They do incredible work, yet they stay invisible for many different reasons. We need to step out of the shadows, speak up, and talk about what we do without constantly comparing ourselves to men. We are different. And precisely because of that, in partnership with men, we can create far greater impact, more scalable, more effective, and more innovative approaches to work. So at some point, when I had accumulated experience and had something meaningful to share, I simply started sharing it.
And especially considering that you currently hold the position of the chair of the supervisory board of a non-profit organization, there must have been specific challenges associated with this role as well?
Yes, of course, there are many challenges. And being the chair of the supervisory board, and as the chair of the supervisory board of New Ukraine, the main challenge has been the bureaucratic processes surrounding how the board should function and how decisions must be made. Sometimes this becomes a major bottleneck, especially during wartime when we understand that support is needed and decisions must be made immediately. There are certain procedures that must be followed and approved, and only after that can we execute or implement a particular project. At the same time, I feel fortunate because first, our supervisory board includes board members from the US organization with extensive experience, and we have open and transparent communication. We also have an excellent team of legal and financial experts in Ukraine, and together we are able to quickly find solutions that comply with the legal requirements of both Ukraine and the United States. So while following procedures sometimes feels frustrating, when you are thinking, why does this matter when we are trying to help hundreds, thousands, or even millions of people? It is critical because it is a core element of trust from our partners and donors.
Katerina, from time to time, aspiring board members approach me, people who do not yet have experience serving on boards. Many people are advised to start by serving pro bono on non-profit boards and within non-profit organizations. Of course, non-profit and charitable work, as well as pro bono board participation, should primarily be driven by a sense of purpose and personal values. At the same time, it can be just as motivating and engaging as paid board positions in corporate businesses.
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no, because nonprofit organizations, depending on their mission and focus, may not carry profit responsibility, but they carry enormous responsibility for people. And when you're working daily, sometimes up to 20 hours a day, dealing with various complex and critical situations, it's inevitable that you'll experience a tremendous amount of burnout. It's a very real and significant risk that comes with such demanding work. I believe McKinsey conducted an analysis or study in 2023 in which they stated that burnout among board members in nonprofit organizations is about 43% higher than in commercial organizations. And this is largely because the work is often accompanied by deep emotional involvement and emotional exhaustion. That is why it requires strong resilience and the ability to manage emotional intelligence in order not to become overwhelmed. You cannot help everyone, and one of the main drivers of burnout is the constant flow of requests. There was a period when we were receiving more than 100 requests for assistance per day. It is impossible to help everyone. Deciding how to choose, how to define criteria, and how to prioritize is one of the most critical challenges. I observe how difficult these discussions are within our board in California at New Ukraine, deciding whether to support a high-quality, well-designed project or to save 10 more lives when the budget is limited is an extremely difficult trade-off. That is why joining a non-profit organization is something worth trying, but it is important to remember that responsibility in the nonprofit sector, in terms of people, lives, and social impact, can be even greater than financial responsibility in commercial organizations.
Katerina, we have discussed many aspects related to work and careers in both business and non-profit sectors, as well as leadership roles in top management and on boards of directors. What advice would you give to business owners or founders of non-profit organizations or projects that have not yet established boards of directors or supervisory boards?
It is difficult to give a precise answer without fully understanding the context, but if we speak in more general terms, I would probably start by asking where the organization wants to be in 10 years. Most business owners or organizational leaders have a vision or a dream, and if they already have a clear answer to this question, that is excellent. The next step is to conduct a gap analysis between that 10-year vision and the organization's current position, to clearly understand and analyze what is missing for the organization to reach that future state, and then to bring in board members who can help the organization get there. There is a well-known concept in HR that an organization can only grow to the level of its leader. In other words, an organization cannot exceed the maturity, effectiveness, or wisdom of its leaders. This is exactly where the board of directors becomes critical, as a unit and a group of people who can help the organization break through its current ceilings, or even shift its strategic direction entirely. I would strongly recommend creating a board of directors and building a network of people with diverse backgrounds and areas of expertise. Because innovation, whether technological, social, or process-driven, is born where diversity exists. This is a core principle of design thinking, and we know that it works. It is very unlikely that something truly new will emerge in an environment where everyone operates in the same field, knows each other well, and can predict what everyone will say. Third, I would say, invite women to join your boards, create opportunities for them, enable their participation, and trust their perspectives and professional judgment. And fourth, develop strong partnership skills. Because boards are not about control. A strong board is built on partnership with the executive team, partnership among board members, and partnership with a broader group of stakeholders in the markets where you operate or the markets you plan to enter. Today, it is impossible for any single company to possess all the required knowledge. However, organizations can scale very quickly when they build strong partnerships with diverse partners who can strengthen areas where the company currently lacks expertise or resources. But partnership is a skill that must be learned.
What advice could be given to women who are building their careers in top management and on boards of directors, or more broadly, to anyone pursuing this path?
The first thing that comes to mind is academic knowledge. This is discussed far too rarely today, but it is extremely important. I will share a small example. We recently had a meeting with Georgetown University, and we clearly see that there is a strong need, especially in the non-profit sector, to invest in formal education around corporate governance, what it is, how it works, why it matters, how to build it, how to systematize it, and how to make it sustainable and long-lasting. The impact of boards of directors on business performance, whether in for-profit companies or non-profit organizations, is significant. So the first piece of advice, regardless of whether you are a man or a woman, is education. This means building strong foundational academic knowledge. You can only change the rules if you understand them. In today's world, it is not realistic to ignore knowledge frameworks that have been developed, proven, tested, and validated over many years. Therefore, the first priority is learning. The second is developing your social capital, stepping beyond your immediate environment and actively participating in public and professional life, not only through networking events or personal connections, but also by speaking on stage, engaging in discussions, building new relationships, sharing your experience, and listening to what others are working on. This is a critical area of growth. A major part of the role of board members is connecting the organization with the outside world, with partners, donors, and clients if it is a business.
Would you also recommend finding a mentor who already has strong expertise in corporate governance and board work so that aspiring board members can work with them to better shape and optimize their career path in this direction?
Absolutely. Mentorship is an excellent opportunity. Mentorship and shadowing. Having someone you can reflect with, someone you can turn to with questions. It may even be more than one mentor, depending on what skills and competencies you want to develop. And again, this is part of building your social capital, having someone you can learn from and gain insight from through real life experience. Having a coach, professional coaching. Today, there are excellent coaches in Ukraine who can help develop personal leadership qualities and prepare people for senior roles. For me personally, this journey led to greater self-confidence. Returning to the topic of women, there is still a high level of self-doubt. It was interesting to see research conducted by Harvard University showing that the highest levels of self-doubt about one's own knowledge were found among MBA graduates from Harvard. In other words, the more we know, the more we tend to question ourselves. This creates a kind of internal paradox and inner conflict.
Even more so because our highest expectations are often the ones we set for ourselves. We keep raising our own standards.
Exactly, expectations toward ourselves. That is why working with a coach and a mentor is so important. It helps build self-trust and confidence. And of course, being ready to continue learning is essential. The world is evolving incredibly fast. Tools that once seemed unlikely to become part of certain industries, such as AI, are now everywhere. If you are not at least literate in AI, building a long-term strategy and especially executing it is, in my view, almost impossible.
Foundational courses are absolutely necessary, but they are not sufficient. Given the pace of change in markets, macroeconomic dynamics, and geopolitical shifts, continuous learning is no longer optional. In other words, learning never stops.
Absolutely. The lifelong learning principle is more relevant today than ever before. At the same time, when you have a strong academic foundation, it becomes much easier to understand what additional skills and competencies you need to layer on in order to grow as an expert.
Katerina, thank you very much for such an insightful and engaging conversation and for sharing such valuable perspectives.
Sergiy, thank you for raising this topic and for bringing together outstanding professionals from Ukrainian business and the nonprofit sector. Your podcast is part of the learning ecosystem we have been talking about, so thank you for this important work.
Thank you, Katerina. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. See you next time on our channel.